Hi, my name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here at Stoller with Kate Payne Brown. It's March 5th, 2020. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kate.
Pleasure.
First question, most important question, why wine?
Gosh, I came into the wine industry like most people do, kind of in a circuitous way. I had an undergrad degree in biology and chemistry from University of Oregon, and I think at that point in the early 2000s, the metric, I graduated in 2000, the metric was if you excelled in science, you had a limited direction, like choice in terms of where you were going with your degrees. And so one of them was medicine and the other one was research. And so kind of fell somewhere in between, and I graduated and decided that I was going to be an optometrist. And it was great. I worked in the optometry field for 4 years in Beaverton for a great clinic that I still go to as a patron because I trust them. And I decided that in doing that, and it wasn't so much that I was like, I don't know if this is what my calling was. I was still young and idealistic, and I was like, I don't know if I want to do this. And so I was applying to optometry schools, and I was volunteering for Hip Chicks Do Wine in an urban winery in Portland, Oregon. And it was right down the street. We lived in Woodstock, and so I just started showing up and doing things like this is really neat. And so from there, I started doing some research into going to school. It's like, people make a career out of this. And it was this eye-opening experience. And my parents were both from New York City, and we moved to Salt Lake City in the early 80s. And like wine, I often get like, do you come from a wine family? And we don't. Like, my parents drank wine, but they weren't like collectors or anything like that. And so when I got into this field, I was like, oh, it kind of married the idea of a science aptitude with something that was intuitive. And I think the term art gets thrown around, like this idea of like having this artistic part and this science part and the marrying of the two. And I think there's some truth to that. I don't think it's as romantic as that, but there is some truth to that. And so I did my research, and I decided that I didn't want to go to school in California. I wanted to go on an adventure, and I applied to a master's program at the University of Adelaide in South Australia, and I got in. And so I think probably much to my parents' chagrin, they didn't really understand what I was doing at that point. They were like, you're not going to go to optometry school, you're not going to be the doctor that we wanted. And it took some time for them to really understand. But at that point, in my early to mid-20s, I was like, moving to Australia, we're going. And so my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, he was just like, great, sign me up, I'm for it, let's do this. And so we got engaged and married within 6 months of me getting accepted to school, and he came with me, and ended up, while I was doing my master's, who was not really interested at that point in the industry, fell into a job working for Petaluma, which is great, working with Brian Kozer, and working with some of the pioneers of the Australian wine industry. While I was getting like a formal degree, he was getting an informal degree, so to speak. And so that was really the beginning of it. We lived there for 2 years, and then we came back just to do one harvest. And so that's the long and the short of it. Like, I think when I was there, to kind of drive back, my parents, I remember talking to my mother at the time and saying that, oh, I've got to get up early, I've got to pick my grapes for my research project. She's like, pick your grapes? That sounds a lot like farming. And so I was like, it's exactly like farming. This is what it is. It's not just, I think they had some idea that, just be drinking wine all the time. or analyzing. I think there's often this confusion between like sommeliers and like going to school to be a winemaker. And yeah, I've often I get the question like, I'm in a grocery store, what wine should I buy? It's like, that's not really what I do. You should talk to the nice wine steward that's in front of you. But yeah, I think that was like the initial idea of their idea of what I was doing. But yeah, it was rooted in so much science and so much research, and it was just a phenomenal time. So that's how I tripped into being a winemaker, so to speak. And I feel like everybody has this route, this way that they get to that, which is pretty cool, which makes our industry so dynamic.
Tell me about the formal education. You had at that point had some experience with Hip Chicks, but clearly were kind of thrown in. So tell me about that experience. And were you hooked immediately? Did it take a little while?
You know, it was a pretty capricious decision to go from like working really occasionally, not even really doing a lot of wine work, into deciding I'm going to do a master's in winemaking. It's probably one of the most capricious decisions that I've ever made in my life. But it worked out. Yeah, it seemed, I didn't have much experience at all at that point. I knew I wanted to stay in the sciences, and how it actually, I mean, in conjunction to that was my husband, well, boyfriend, we went on a Harley ride and with his dad and their friends, and we met this gentleman, and sadly I cannot recall his name, but he said that he'd met this other gentleman who was a grape consultant. That's how he described him. And this grape consultant was got a degree from OSU, and now travels the world and drinks wine, and he said had a strong science background, and OSU was looking for people with strong science backgrounds. And so that was really what piqued my interest. I was already kind of volunteering at Hip Chicks, but really the catalyst to applying to school and thinking about a career was this gentleman who kind of planted the seed for looking into a higher or more formal education in it. And I never found out who this grape consultant was. I wish I knew. I mean, that would be glorious. That would be a full circle moment right there. But I never, he didn't know his name. So I was like, okay, well, I like to travel. I like to drink wine. I've got a strong science background. This could be like the ideal job for me. And it was really as simple as that. I started looking at schools immediately, and I think the reason I didn't consider at that point OSU is because I went to UVO, and I wanted to not it wasn't the rivalry between the schools, but I'd already had the adventure of moving and coming to Oregon to go to undergrad, and I wanted to, go to the next adventure. And so, and I didn't necessarily want to, at that point, pay out-of-state California tuition. So I started looking elsewhere, and I had a friend who was doing a master's in Adelaide in a different field, and she's like, "This is a great program. You should look at it." And I did, and it was phenomenal. It was a phenomenal experience. I can't speak highly enough of it.
What was your impression of Australia's wine industry at that point? Did you get kind of a glimpse at it?
I did. We got a big glimpse at it. At that point, and it's still, there were so many wonderful pioneers of the Australian wine industry, and I was really fortunate to go to school with a lot of the children of those pioneers, and so, and I remember just being kind of starstruck, like, oh, we're drinking, this particular bottle, and I'm sitting next to the sun, and having not grown up in a wine family, it was like, oh gosh, this is so exciting, and it was great. There were only 20 people in the master's program, and I think maybe 40 in the undergrad, maybe a little bit more. So it was pretty small. I don't know if those numbers are correct, but I know the master's one, but 20, there were only 20 of us from all over the world. But yeah, it was great. They gave us a lot of opportunity to get out in the industry, and we went on a lot of offsite kind of tours and talked about it, and then we worked in the industry after. And so at that point it was still expanding, although when this was in 2007 when I graduated, they were kind of in the midst of no, I graduated in 2006. Gosh, it all goes so fast. Yeah, they were in the midst of like this big 50-year drought, which seemed like new to them. It's not as new now, unfortunately. And everything at that point was contracting. Wineries were kind of either coming together or closing, and it was an interesting time to be a winemaker there. And I think there's been some resurgence, although now with wildfires and droughts and all of that, it's challenging everywhere. But it was such a remarkable place. I think the original idea for us was that we were going to go back to Australia. So we were only going to come back for one harvest, because we kept talking about Oregon Pinot. Oh, you Australians, especially South Australians, you don't know how to make Oregon Pinot, or you don't know how to make Pinot Noir, not Oregon Pinot. And so when we went to, we're like, well, we should come back and work one harvest and then go back to Australia and try to get our residency and stay here for an extended period of time. And so after I graduated, I worked for, I'm jumping around, but I worked for Tintara after I graduated, and which was at that point a 5,000-ton winery in McLaren Vale, and it was pretty remarkable, actually. We had I think harvest was like over 4 months, 4 to 5 months, must have been, because you'd start the beginning of January and you go through past Easter, mid-April, and you would do 2 weeks on day shift, have exactly 24 hours off, and then go 2 weeks on night shift. And that was insane. It was insane. I think about that sometimes as I'm preparing for harvest, because I feel like the hardest time, or at least the most stress and anticipation, is right before we start harvesting. And once you're in harvest, you're doing it, right? We have, you're in it. It's all that kind of prep and are we going to pick? Are we going to do this? And kind of for me now as a parent, getting my kids ready for us to be not present as much adds another level of stress. But I would think about that time, it's like, gosh, when we are really busy, it's only here. I mean, I'm really only gone for a few weeks, even though harvest is 8 to 10 weeks. But the crux of it is only about 3 weeks where it's madness, controlled madness, but still madness. And then, yeah, I remember Australia, and at that point I was an intern, so you don't have the 35,000-foot view. You're just the worker bee, but it's 4.5 months and so that perspective of being 3 weeks we can do. This is great. 4 weeks or 4 months, 4.5 months. That's a challenge.
That's a little crazy. That's a little crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. So thankful for that for right now.
So the original plan was back for one harvest and then back to Australia, but I noticed you're still here. So tell me what happened.
I know. Yes. So 2007 we came back. So our harvest in 2007 in Tintara, and then we came back. My husband was at Petaluma. He came back and went to Domaine Serene as an intern, and I got a job at Archery Summit, and which are great wineries. So right after harvest, and 2007 was, an interesting harvest. It was really warm growing season, and then it got pretty rainy. And I just remember it being a pretty intense harvest. And after that harvest, it was before the recession and things were still expanding. We both got offered great jobs. So I got offered right after harvest, pretty much after harvest, the enologist position, and then quickly moved to assistant winemaker at Archery Summit. And my husband got offered the cellar master position at Domain Stream. And it was so serendipitous in that we both got offered these positions pretty close together, and it made our decision pretty easy. Positions like that don't come up that readily, and so we made the decision to, we'll just see. We'll take these jobs. They don't get offered that often, and so let's do it. And so we did. And so now that was 2000, the beginning of 2008 to end of 2007. So 12 years later, we're still here. Time does go quickly. 12 years, house, 2 kids. Goes by in a flash.
Tell me about your time at Archery Summit. We were talking a little bit before we started about some of the people you worked with there. Tell me about who was there when you were there, and who mentors, and sort of the job you were doing.
So fortunate because I got the opportunity to work with Anna Matzinger and Lee Bartholomew. Anna was the head winemaker at the time, and Lee was the vineyard manager. They were both co-GMs. But to work with it. And then Corey Beyer, who is still there. He was a cellar master at the time. But to work with such an amazing team. I was there for 6 years, and it was just a wonderfully supportive atmosphere. Certainly not without, challenging harvest or whatever, but it was certainly an informative time for me, and really shaped my career as a winemaker and my perspective of making wine. And I'm still incredibly close to Anna and Lee, and I count Anna as one of my mentors, who's really helped me become the winemaker that I am today. So it was great, and at that point to be on a all-women winemaking team, 10 years ago was pretty remarkable. And I've been so fortunate in that worked with amazing women led companies for the most part, and teams. So it's helped me become a better manager and think about things from a different perspective. But it was great, working at Archery Summit. We only made Pinot Noir. Well, we made a little bit of Pinot Gris, but for the most part, to be able to focus on different vineyards, 5 different vineyards, and trying to make different Pinot Noirs from those particular vineyards in kind of like the hands-off minimalist way. Was fantastic. And I carry a lot of that experience with me today. So, it was, and I think when I think back to those moments, and I'm like, oh gosh, there was a lot of discussion. We had the time, not always, but there was a lot of time to discuss things and be inquisitive and really contemplative about wines in general. And I try and think about that still when I'm considering blends, or and maybe that speaks to why I got to this position as well, in thinking about creating reserve wines and the legacy wines here, because when you're provided the latitude to be thoughtful about things and to really do things with intention, which I think we did do that at Archery, and we do that here, but it's so different when you're provided the space to be thoughtful about things. Really is there's a certain amount of freedom in that, because it doesn't happen very often. And so to have that space is a gift, really.
You talked about your initial role as an enologist, quickly assistant winemaker. I'm curious, what are your tasks? What are you doing as assistant winemaker, and at what point do you feel your voice is valuable and able to be in the same room as people who are your mentors?
That's a good question. There's a lot of, I think when I was new to the industry, there's a different sense of, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess self-assurance, really, and confidence. And so, yeah, you're kind of, as an enologist, you're trying to think of wine through, at least this was my perspective, a textbook lens. So does it fit through this? Maybe we should try this. And you're looking at it through defined parameters, which is great. It's a great place to start. And then as you gain more experience and more perspective, you're able to color outside the lines. And I don't know when that transition really changed. I think there was a great, working with those women in that team, there was a lot of bolstering of talent, and there wasn't necessarily a closed room like scenarios where certain people weren't really allowed per se. It was like, okay, we're having these discussions. If you have the ability to do so, please be a part of those discussions. And that was really great. I don't know that there was like this defined point where it's like, but I think over time and being exposed to different tastings or different people or different ways of thinking about things, you start to figure out how your style, like what resonates with you, and how your style changes, and how, I think now as a winemaker, because I've had that time to, and certainly with school and a formal education, to color within those lines, and then now to be like, okay, well, it's going to be fine. Let's just try this. And I think that's important. I think that's a great transition to have. And I don't know that I can pinpoint the exact moment. I wish I could. Like one day, like, aha, let's go outside. But it's a slow progression to think about your own, your equity as like a person and a winemaker, and how that kind of translates to the wines that you're going to make.
At what point did you define yourself as a winemaker? At what point did you tell people you were a winemaker?
Oh gosh, I'm sure I told people I was an assistant winemaker. I know, just right. Like I think in our society, when you move into any type of role, everybody, or any type of social interaction, the first question is like, what do you do, for better or for worse, in our country? And so you start to think about yourself. And I think in that way, and it's interesting in this profession, I think the identity, your identity and your wine personality or everything, there's a blurring of that. So it becomes a lot of a lifestyle as well. And you can't get away from it, right? You could try, but certainly it's more difficult to remove yourself living in like wine country and working in wine, and it becomes part of who you are, for better or for worse. It definitely leaves a mark. So in a good way, but it becomes part of your identity. I don't know when I started considering myself a winemaker. I probably said it long before I would probably deem myself qualified to. But that's how it goes.
So you spent 6 years at Archery Summit. How did you end up here?
Well, so after I left Archery, I went and worked for a French consultant by the name of Kiniapoulos, and he owns a big laboratory, and we worked with him at Archery Summit, and I work with him now, and I still work for him now in a way. I manage his clients in like North America and help him. He would call me an ambassador. I would call me like his secretary. But when we first tried it, he was thinking that he wanted to expand kind of the idea, like the paradigm of like the way that the French handle like counsel or consultancy. and bring that over to the U.S. And to have like somebody here all the time to manage that and expand. But the idea of like counseling for winemaking per se is so different there as opposed to here. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, it just wasn't directly translatable. Mm-hmm. And so I was working with Kyriakos, and Kyriakos has been a consultant here since I think 2008, maybe before that, 2005. And he had said, had been working with him, and Melissa said, oh, we have somebody leaving, would you want to do some consulting beyond what you do for Kyriakos here, and help us through this time? And I was like, sure, that'd be great. And I was consulting for a few different wineries in the valley, just trying to see what my next move was, which was great. But you also don't get a chance to know something so well when you're in so many different places. At least that's how I felt at that point. And so I came here on a consulting basis in 2014. And then in 2015, we started expanding here. And I didn't really have a complete idea of what the expansion would be at Stoller at that point, but they said, do you want to stay on and really manage the reserve and the smaller tier, higher end brands, which is something I excel at. That is what I do. And so it's like, this seems like a great opportunity. So that's really how I ended up here. And then since then, it's been phenomenal. It's been, the transition from Melissa going to VP of winemaking, and then the transition of getting and building the new facility in Ben Howe, taking over and managing that facility, and kind of having, different rooms of winemaking, so to speak, different wineries under the same house, and being able to focus on the larger volume and the smaller volume within the same company, and having people to manage that has been remarkable.
So you're focusing on the reserve, the small, like you say, smaller production, higher. So tell me about focusing on something so narrow at a place like this. How do you define your role in that way? How do you work with other people who are doing similar things?
I think it's become easier. Well, I think it's easier now that we have, a defined person for each building, and that really lends itself to helping that definition, because we are constrained by space up here and capacity, and how it kind of worked out was that we realized that we needed two separate teams within our production team, one that focuses on the reserves up at this facility, and then another team that focuses at the estate winery. And so that helps the definition, and then we kind of flesh that out. So up here I have an assistant winemaker and a cellar lead, and the three of us really, aside from some interns, we do about 14 to 18,000 cases in this facility, which is great. Everything that we do up here is estate grown, and because of the other facility, we don't have to turn tanks, so we don't have to be rushed. It's that, again, bringing it back to intention and bringing it back to this idea of let's give them the latitude to make the best possible wine within how we see it, we have that space to do it. And so as a winemaking team, we come together for blending, or we have meetings where we discuss ideas. We do all of our bottling at the other facilities, so we all lean on each other for different things. And it's been great. It's been really nice to have, this space, but then also have a broader team to bounce ideas off of. And then with Shahaman being involved as well, that's, the experience and the brain power of of a pretty dynamic winemaking team, and we all really bring such a different perspective to winemaking. Just pretty neat to have your individual spaces and then come together and be like, have you tried this, or what do you think of this, or and I find that really invaluable.
Before you came on board here full time, you had a perspective of Stoller, I'm guessing, from outside and then from kind of consulting. I'm curious, what was it about here that made you want to be here beyond just the opportunity to do the reserves? Was there something else about Stoller that attracted you?
I had been friends with Melissa, and I really saw how she kind of paved the way for setting the tone for having a family and still doing this job. I think what's so interesting about being a woman in this industry is that, and I know that a lot of younger women feel like, how can you do both? And I remember being pregnant with my first child. I was like, I just don't think I'll be able to do this, and give like the attention that you need to be present in this role, and then also have a family. And that was when I came here. It was really at the beginning of the 2014 harvest. I think my oldest son he must have been a year and a half, around there, and I mean, that was the appealing side of consulting. You kind of make your time within, and so harvest was very different that year. In a frenetic way, it was just as busy, but you were. I came here and it was like, oh gosh, I saw how the team interacted, and I saw how the beautiful property. I had spent time here, but didn't really understand the nuances of like the old vines, or like the property, or the history that was so ingrained in here. And I really liked it. I really felt that this company valued its employees and its and I could still I could envision myself having being a mother and still doing my job and being able to do it well under kind of the guidelines that were already set here. So that was incredibly attractive at that point. And also to bring back the idea of focusing on one piece of land and making the best wine for that particular site. It's funny, in retrospect, there's a lot of wonderful women in our industry, and we get together, and there's the idea of trying to manage it all is still something that we still talk about, right? In between, report cards or making sure my son gets his soccer stuff this morning before coming here, but it doesn't stop, so that's what it is in a good way. But yeah, to answer your question, that's what really drew me to here, was the fact that they focused on quality, focused on you could still have a life. I really believe that tone was set from management early on, and I really credit Melissa into being steadfast and being I want to do this, but I also want to have this portion of my life too. And so, not that we all don't work hard, but I think that is a testament to that you can still do this. And I often get the question from women who are in their mid-20s, they're younger, or even approaching when they want to have a family. It's how do you do it? I was I can't. There's not a prescribed way. I'm just here to tell you that you can do it. Go gray, but you can do it. You can. It's feasible. You just need to create space for it. So in 2016, I had my second son right before harvest, and so it was a true test. I had been here a year, and I found out I was pregnant, and things are never planned out well. He was born at the end of July, and 2016, for the record, was the hottest vintage on record, the earliest, and so we brought in a fruit for sparkling program August 20th, I believe, which was the earliest that we've ever brought in fruit in the history of Stoller. And it was during our club weekend, our club event, which was interesting. And my son was just almost a month old. So, and then from there it just started, right? So it was such a funny vintage. I mean, fortunately the yields were lower, so didn't have to battle a deluge of fruit, but which was great because I had a newborn to bring with me every day. But I mean, that was supported here. Like it was, yeah, great. If you want to do harvest, they're like you could sit this harvest out, but the idea of not knowing the grapes from the beginning and seeing everything through wasn't appealing to me. It seems like you lose context, and so I wanted to go for it, to bring him to work. And I mean, it was challenging, but it worked out. He's, well adjusted, I think. I don't think he wants to be a winemaker, but we'll see. We'll see.
Got time to change his mind. Yeah, exactly.
He's 3.5. He wants to be a unicorn, right?
Well,
so
who doesn't?
It's true. So true.
You talked a little bit earlier about this industry in particular and how you kind of have that blend of like you're kind of always in wine. It's always part of what you're doing. I'm curious as there are more and more women like you coming into the industry who want to have a family. Are you seeing the standards change a little bit? Are you seeing more places that are more flexible, like Stoller has been?
I'm hoping so, and we're advocating for it. So I have a tasting group that really Anna Metzinger and Cheryl Francis started, and it was there's 7 of us, and it's like Lynn Penarash, who's the first woman winemaker, and Louisa Ponzi, and Gina Hennon, and Wynn and Peterson Entry, and me. And so like there's this thing that we started about 5 years ago, just kind of meeting and tasting through each other's cellars, and from there it's kind of grown into this idea of like, wow, we have this forum for support that we feel like other women should have. And and right now we're in this moment, this groundswell of forum and symposiums for women, which is great. But we wanted to focus more on the production side, because there is that idea, like the standards for women winemakers as opposed to men are a little bit different. And so we're trying to advocate for that and provide the opportunities for women to, have networking and mentoring opportunities within our industry. We're just like in the beginning of that. We started a group called Women in the Room, because we often felt that there's always, one woman on a panel or one woman in a tasting. So instead of like one woman the only woman in the room, which we often joke that like one of the 7 of us are probably like the only one, the token woman on the panel or something like that. And I don't think it's intentionally like that, we need to put one woman on there, but you look around and you're like, wow, I am the only one on here right now. And everybody kind of, all of us, take turns kind of being that person. For better or for worse. I'm glad somebody represents at some point, but the idea of starting like this broader forum was to change that and bring more women to decision-making roles in the production side, and to be invited to the table. And so, we're in the beginning of it. So I'm hoping that it changes. And I think it has. I see change even in the 12 years that I've been in the Oregon wine industry. I think there's certainly, I see it in just the applicants in terms of interns that apply. I think there's often more women applying than men, which is great. So it's just providing those opportunities.
Tell me about coming to a place like this where you're focusing on only estate grapes and only part of the winemaking. Tell me about learning the property, learning your vineyard, learning your grapes, and trusting yourself to make those kinds of wines.
Yeah, that's, I think, where experience comes in and perspective. I think it would have been far more nervous or maybe less confident about it had I not had so many years at Archery Summit where we were doing something similar but different, right? Because every state is different. But kind of embedding yourself in the land and the winery and kind of figuring it out is has certainly helped me understand, and made me more confident, like my decisions to pick or my decisions to leave wine on skins for longer, or the decision to move to all native ferments or things like that. And that just comes with time. I think the first year it was like, okay, the blocks are set up in such an interesting way. I often say it's like the Dewey Decimal System, because we have like 11.1, 11.2, and then we have like 20.1, and it's like they're all broken up, and the difference is like, either spacing or like difference in rootstocks or clones. And so really kind of getting a map of the vineyard and knowing what's going to work well for the programs. I mean, the benefit for me coming in and working and having Melissa and the history that she's had here is like she kind of established some of like the sections that we would consider like Grand Cru sections. So like having that history already was really glorious, because it's like not starting from ground zero. It's like, okay, we have this moment, and then things are changing. I'm evolving, the vineyard's evolving, the idea of how you want to make wine, the climate certainly is evolving. It's all changing, so not like holding on to like a specific dogma, but being open to change and being open to being experimental is really important. But then having that history to be like, okay, we can think about this section from a certain perspective, and then we can move on and we can think about this section. And I really like to think about the vineyard, from different points of view, like certainly from our old vines, where like so much history and like the concentration of the fruit, and then you get to some of the newer vines, or like some of these new varietals that we planted that are untested for us, which are super exciting from a winemaking perspective. But you get the sense that, the story's not written. There's a long history, but we're still got a lot to say. So, I think given that time that I've spent elsewhere has made me a better winemaker here, because I can take that former experience and lend it, like, if nothing else, like the confidence to make decisions in order to be effective.
How would you describe your winemaking philosophy, and maybe like what would be the ultimate takeaway someone would have from a bottle of your wine?
I'd like to hope that it was to be the storyteller, right? I think in winemaking, Katie from Shea Hallam's just walking past, laughing at me.
She's been right where you've been. She knows what's going on.
She it's great. No, I like to tell the story without a lot of noise, right? So I want to tell the story of the vineyard and the vintage, and showcase like these little nuances of the vineyard. And I think I see that now more and more as my job. Right? So as the storyteller, and not kind of trying to manipulate anything. So every vintage is going to be different. I mean, we're going to play around with some stylistic preferences, but overall, like I think if you were to look at one of the reserve Pinot Noirs or Chardonnays, it's indicative of the vintage and the year, and I can reflect back on those, and it's like seeing an old friend, sort of. And I was just at a dinner in Arizona, and they had like a 2014 Chardonnay, and it's like, oh gosh, we've been sold out of that for a while. Hello, old friend. How are you? And it's so nice to think back, or when I think about like 2016, and which is, we're still, we're just now kind of selling out of. And when I revisit that wine, my God, that was I mean, I had just had a baby, and so I think back of like how hard that vintage was, and it's like listening to a seashell, and you could kind of hear my son crying in it, and not in a bad way, but it's reminiscent of that time and that place, and that story of that vintage, and the fact that it was so early, and you know, it just kind of compounded everything. But again, like and for me, like telling, being able to like show what even each vintage brings is really important. And so I don't know if that's like a pinpoint style or, but it's important to me. So I think about that through using native ferments or trying to not be as heavy-handed or contrived. That is my goal. So if the story of the vintage is that fruit wants to stay in the tank longer, then that's going to be what the story is. Like 2019, that was the opposite story. So you never know what it's going to be. I think over time, well, yeah, like in this vintage in particular, where it was pretty cool and more classic Oregon, I mean, having the lens and the perspective of some of those cooler, challenging vintages was really beneficial. And then having the idea of, it's all going to be okay, right? We love to drink these wines. We love to have these wines now, right? And like 5-10 years later, those cooler vintages are often the wines that we reach for first, and with far more stories to tell. So, yeah, I think it was interesting this year that, you know, a lot of winemakers or young winemakers or young people to this industry hadn't experienced a true Oregon vintage. Kind of brought it back around, and it was great, you know, to flex a different muscle and to think about wines in a different way.
Solve some challenges you hadn't had to solve in a while.
Yeah, or to think about it in a different way, you know. Yeah, we were telling ourselves a story of like, you know, picking for lower sugar and therefore lower alcohol, or battling desiccation, or, you know, all of these things that you tell yourself as like the new normal, and to kind of have, you know, the pendulum swing back just a little bit and remind you that why we are here in Oregon is that most people who choose to make wine here are of the adventurous spirit, and that it's not going to be the same every harvest, and that's what the cool part of it is. And you can't just sit back and expect it to be one way, even when you think, I mean, right now I keep saying, oh, it's going to be our early vintage, and it might be, but who knows, right? We've got a long way to go until we're actually picking grapes, maybe in August, perhaps in September. But we've got you know, a lot of months of potentially variable weather until we get to that point. So who knows what it's going to be like yet.
So you worked between Archery Summit and Stoller. You worked for some pretty prestige name brands here in the Valley. I'm curious if that adds pressure to your job. Do you feel like there's a certain standard you have to set?
I think I always hold myself to a certain standard, regardless. But I don't know. I don't know if it's pressure. I think there's pressure to make sure that the wines are always great. And I think there is pressure to, make sure that I'm doing, you know, certainly this place justice. I think there's a lot of trust that Bill Stoller puts on his team, and to live up to that trust, I think we are all feel really strongly about. He's not a micromanager, and he loves this place. This is his home, and so just trying to make sure that the trust is warranted, right? Like, he allows us to do what we want within reason to make sure that we make the best possible wine, and so it's pretty fantastic to work for a company and a person that allows you that freedom to do so, because I don't feel like that happens very often. But yeah, personally, I think for me, I don't see the pressure being because I've worked at other places, to perform a certain way, the pressure is to make sure that it carries through in like the product that we're producing.
Tell me about Argument Wine.
So my husband and I started a little label called Argument. It's actually Nagy Brown. Started with the Nagys, and Chris Nagy used to work at Archery Summit in marketing. And we started this in 2014 was our first vintage. And it was just something that we wanted to do, to have our own little label. We had just had our first son, and it seemed important to set a legacy, for better or for worse.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a project that we still do today, and we have another little sparkling project called Dolores that is going to be released soon. That is just something that we did to do. I don't know if there's any other. I mean, it's done with intention, but we don't make a lot of it, and we don't have a lot of time to sell it. So, yeah, it was something that we wanted to do for us and do like a couple hundred cases here and there and see. But I think whenever you start a label, you realize that it takes so much effort to sell wine. Mm-hmm. And so it's a challenge. But it was great, to certainly work with my husband in that capacity for these tiny little things. It's nice. It's I guess not as much of a challenge as we thought we needed to actually physically work together. I guess which bodes well for the future and our marriage, so that's good. But yeah, so it was one of those things where like this fruit was available, we should try it, and we started the sparkling project around the same time. But sparkling takes so much longer to make, and when I first got into the wine industry, and probably my classmates will tell you that I always said that I was going to make sparkling wine, and that was also one of the things that really drew me here, is that they were just thinking about starting a sparkling program, and maybe it was like the naivete of like, I'm just going to make sparkling wine, and not really knowing exactly how to do it or what to do. And I was first in school, and now it's like, wow, it's a process, which I still love. I mean, it's one of my favorite things to still make and drink, for sure. But yeah, when we started both projects, really, I was still working for the consultant. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, okay, we'll just do it. And so we could do it as part of my husband's package for his work. We didn't have to pay for it, pay for facility charges. Mm-hmm. And so it seemed like a good idea, and then we just do it. I don't know, maybe in 10 years from now it will be something different, but right now we're both heavily focused on where we're at, what we're doing, and we just do it for fun, to have something that's 100% ours. Mm-hmm. So.
And why the name?
Argument, when we first started thinking about it, it was like, well, how do you sell great wine? Is it like the vineyard or the land, or is it like marketing really does it? And that was really how it started with Argument. And it's stuck. It's been great. I think it sells from our website. So, and it's, vineyard designate from an organic winery down by Dallas area. So, yeah, it's like, it was just something that we were like, oh, the argument. We had this idea of like, this is the argument. And of course, as a lot of concepts are created, at least in my world, generally happens around a table much like this, with a bunch of people drinking wine, and you kind of roll with it. So that's how that name. And then Dolores, the sparkling, my last name, Payne. Dolor means pain in Spanish. And when my mom lived in Spain, they couldn't pronounce her first name, which was Charlene, and they called her Dolores. And so it was one of those things, and my mom has since passed. And so it was one of those stories that you kind of recall. Like I think she probably told it to me in passing when I was younger. And so when we were thinking about this, I'm finally getting to a point where it was like, oh my gosh, we started the project like 4.5 years ago, 5 years ago, and we're now at this point where we didn't want it to be the same thing. We wanted it to kind of have a nod to her, but also it is Pinot Rouge, which is an esoteric varietal in the Willamette Valley, a mutant of Pinot Noir. And it started of its own kind of project, its own little thing where Drew Voigt and Andrew Bandy Smith and Chad Stock were splitting this acre of Pinot Rouge from the Zivo property, which is now owned by David Page and called RPG. And they said, we're splitting this acre. Would you be interested in taking part of this acre and doing a sparkling project and with your own label? And I was like, sure, it's just money. Why not? And so we did, and we've just been kind of doing it. So it will come out soon. It's only 100 cases. Again, they're micro projects, but it's just something that we started to just to do and to have for our prosperity.
It's nice of them to come to you with a fully formed model here. Here's the grape you're going to take. Here's what you're going to do with it.
Yeah, isn't it so funny? So you get to this point. I know. It's like, sure. I mean, again, I guess another capricious decision that worked out, but it was like, why not? I mean, that could be interesting. I think the idea was that we'd all sell it, like, collectively, like support each other in those entities of sale, but their wines, being not a sparkling wine, were ready so much sooner than the sparkling that they were probably already moved past when we'd even do it. So, I mean, everything evolves and changes. So that's just how it started. And who knows what will happen in the future. We just wanted, at that point, 5 years ago, before we were in certain roles in certain places, we just started it. We perpetuated it, like a ton here, a couple tons there. So yeah, it's a cautionary tale. Starting your own project. But I mean, Stoller's been super supportive. I mean, it's just one of those things that I guess could still be considered a hobby, but we sell occasionally.
You've talked about sparkling being the kind of the sort of the jewel on the crown of coming here and working and something that appeals to you. What about the process of making it is appealing to you? Why do you enjoy that part of it?
It's hard to make sparkling wine and do it well. I don't know what it was. I mean, I think I'm not unlike a lot of people in that I've always liked to drink sparkling wine and champagne. So if you were to put me on a desert island, I'd probably say I'd take a handful of champagnes with me. I think when I first started looking into it, I was like, gosh, it takes a while. The wine is so transparent. It can't have any flaws, and if it does, it will show through, and it's not going to be as good. So there's a challenge in it. And then to have this product that the road is so long to get to the end point, making a traditional method, sparkling wine. It was just appealing in that. I mean, I think I lobbied. I remember asking Anna, and being like, we should make sparkling at Archery Summit. And they were not really excited about keeping, wines just sitting there for like 3 to 4 years. That's a lot of capital, right? Which I totally get. But it seemed, and it's so funny, when we started it here, we really started at Stoller 2013, kind of dipping the toe in, and then 2014 we started farming specifically for sparkling, and we've really started making an intentional move to make more high-end sparkling wine. And now to look back at that the ethos and the idea of the category of sparkling wine has become so much broader here in Oregon, and I'm so proud to be among I mean, not as, not my first like Roland or Tony Soder or, you know, some of the initials, but in that beginning next wave of like producers wanting to make quality sparkling wine. And I'm really happy that that movement is starting to gain traction, and people are seeing Oregon sparkling wines for quality unto itself. Because we are in this fantastic space and place and time to be able to do it well. It's just continuing the conversation really of it.
You talked quite a bit earlier about experiences as a woman in the industry and as a mother and the balance. And you talked about the kind of the amount of symposia that are right now about that specific topic. I know you were a part of the Assemblage Symposium recently. Tell me a little bit about that experience, its first year and your role in it, and kind of what you saw from that going forward.
I think it was incredibly well done. I think when we saw this symposium kind of being formed and fleshed out. Like, I don't know that, I wasn't on the steering committee, I was just asked to be a part of a panel. It was actually put together by Wynn Peterson Edry, who's in our tasting group, and she asked 4 of us to be on the panel to talk about, they said lessons from the cellar, which I kept joking that I was like, oh, you know, how to properly coil a hose. Or things like that. But it was really, you know, more broad about, it was taken from like, how do you have the work-life balance, or as a woman in a winemaking role, and what are some of the other like issues? Is there, you know, or some things like gender equality, or like the discussion of equal pay and all of that. And so they wanted to provide a panel for women specifically and production focused, where we could talk about, I don't know, questions that were generated in that scenario, in that sense, and not just how to coil a hose, which would have been made up for a really short discussion. Although it's a really important skill to have. It was good. It was, I think we often take for granted once you reach a certain point in your career, like, and if people still have like the same struggles that you did when you were earlier on in your career. I mean, we all have things that we, challenges and certainly successes, but I think it was beneficial, and what was told to me after was that, you know, some of the questions specifically about like having a family, or how to navigate like glass ceilings or things like that. And how my takeaway from it was that we still need to have these conversations, and that we still need these forums to support each other, and to I think there's a lot of, I think it's getting better, but a lot of people didn't talk about these things in a more global or broader setting for the longest time. And so to have these conversations, like no holds bar, like, what did you do when you were nursing your child, and doing this, or random things like that. Not random, I mean, super important, but things like that, like kind of the nuts and bolts of it. And so it was great, and the whole 2-day symposium was phenomenal. I think they did an excellent job of not just talking about, you know, what women feel are like the issues. It was more of like bolstering each other and lifting everybody up, and that was what my takeaway was a lot from. And we all make mistakes. We all have lessons to learn from each other. We all kind of turn a corner sometimes, and then maybe wish they was a different corner. But I think what women do well, what was interesting, they talked a lot about, like, you know, the fight or flight application, and how that paradigm was originally established from one subset of like men in like 1930 or something, as is now still something that people talk about to this day. Like, oh, it's your fight or flight reaction, and they're like, oh, no. When studied with women kind of tend and befriend, and they gather their village or their crew, and they unite, and then they go fight. And so I was like, yes, that is so true, right? The old adage that it does take a village is so important. And that was another thing that one of my recommendations: lean on your people. Mm-hmm. You can't do it all yourself, as much as we want to.
Tell me about what you've seen change in the industry since you've been a part of Oregon Wine, and kind of where it stands now in 2020.
When I first came back, we were to Oregon. There was a lot of people, talking about like our Burgundian ways, right? Like how we made wines in like the old world fashion, or we were emulating different areas of the world in order to create the Pinot Noir from our estates, and I just we don't have to hold true to that anymore. What I've seen and what has been so wonderful is like this idea of brand Oregon, the idea of the identity of Oregon has really come into itself in the time that I've been here. It's been pretty remarkable. I remember when I first moved to Australia, people were like, Oregon, where's that? I'm like, oh, below Washington, above California. And they're like, oh, okay.
There's something there?
Yeah, there's this space that exists there. We make Pinot Noir and Chardonnay and some other varietals. And so, and certainly, going to Burgundy, and, you'd hear when I first started going there, a few producers like, oh, I think I've heard of, Dundee Hills or Willamette Valley. But the good majority, I wouldn't admit that they had at that point. And now it's like Oregon's on the map. And now the French are coming here, right? And so it's been such an interesting time in that 12 years, 10 years. Things have changed a lot. Mm-hmm. There's certainly more wineries. There's the same amount of collaboration, I would say, and conversation, which is great. But with the influx of more people and more wineries, there's a broader pool of ideas, really, which is great. And so as things continue to get warmer and the climate becomes more variable, we're going to have to become more creative and think about things from a different standpoint. And I think what is so wonderful about Oregon is that we are always constantly learning and not just leaning on heritage or legacy. Mm-hmm. And I had said before that it draws out an adventurous spirit, and it really does, because it's going to continue to change. And we're going to continue to change. Mm-hmm.
What do you see as you look ahead? What's it going to look like in 2030? Maybe what do you hope, and maybe what do you fear is going to happen here?
Gosh, it's like a time capsule, isn't it?
Exactly. It's exactly what this is.
I know. Gosh, I wish I knew for sure. That would be beneficial. I think there's still going to be expansion. As I see it right now, I think Oregon's going to continue. It's going to be drier in the summer and then wetter in the winters and the fall. So I think we're going to have to get creative, or not creative, but think about farming from a different standpoint. Mm-hmm. I think we're often asked, it's like, oh, are we going to have to plant Cabernet? And I don't foresee that. I think maybe some other varietals might kind of come into play, but I don't think Pinot will be obsolete at all here. I like to think that we all, I hope that we all start getting along. I hope in 10 years there's world peace and flying cars, but I don't know. It feels weird that we're in 2020, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't know what the future holds, but I hope that we get to a point where we can manage what the onslaught of climate change is going to present. And I envision that we'll still be farming. Bill Stoller here, he makes companies that last 200 years. That's his goal. And so really just setting it up for the future and thinking about being stewards of the land and hopefully still making wines that are reflective of that. Yeah, personally, I mean, in 10 years, probably start getting my kids ready for college, so that'll be interesting. But yeah, there's a lot on the horizon. And I'm a pretty optimistic person, so I'd like to think that hopefully we're just in a turbulent moment in time, and that we'll come through it with, some lessons learned, and I still have faith in humanity that we'll figure it out. But that's where I'm at. I don't know. I can't give you anything concrete. Otherwise, I'd be in a different field. But I think that we will. People are pretty resilient, and so people feel strongly about what they're doing, and I envision that it's not going to change that much. We're just going to have to be mindful about how we farm and the practices that we employ, and yeah. And the funny thing is, about 10 years it goes by quickly.
It does.
I can attest to that. So it seems, it's funny because came back in 2007, and that truly seems like yesterday, but a lot has happened. So, yeah, I don't know. It will be interesting to reflect on this in 10 years and see where we're at. But
for you personally, are there any goals you have set for yourself? Anything you'd like to achieve? Anything you haven't tried yet that you want to try?
Skydiving. No, I don't know. There's lots of things. There's lots of personal goals, and I wish I was better about setting goals for the future. I think as we go forward, I would love to, get to a point where there's like a subset of wines that you're like, oh gosh, I said that they already tell a story, but like my goals for the future are always like, well, I don't even know what my goal is. I can't even say. Like, I think that, once you reach a certain point in your career, like, oh, okay, winemaker of this, like, I just want to continue to do the best job that I'm doing. Best job that I can do. I don't know if there's one specific thing. I'd like to make sure, the wines are still well received. Who knows where I'll be in 10 years. Possibly, this is a great spot. I'll still be here. There seems to be a lot of longevity in the team here, so I don't know. But yeah, right now I think for this moment, like looking forward in 5-10 years, like I just want to keep making the best possible wines that we can make.
It's a noble goal.
Simple.
I assume you get this question quite a bit from people who are interested in getting into the industry. I want your advice. What kind of words of wisdom do you have for someone who wanted to get into Oregon wine right now?
Apply for an internship and really see if it's something that you want to do. We often get the question of like, oh, do I need experience? And it's helpful. But for here at Stoller, we hire such a big team during harvest that a couple people here and there that don't have any experience, we can manage. And so if it's something that you really think you're interested in, get some experience before you kind of dive in, because harvest may not be for everybody. It's a lot of cleaning things. It's a lot of cleaning, and that's what it takes, essentially, in the beginning parts of it. And I think what I always try and impress people, like, if you have like a science degree, you don't have to fit. And I think times, I mean, I'm sure I sound like an old person, times are changing. I think
Kids these days.
these kids these days. But they are, I think the idea of success is so different than when I was growing up, and the idea of, like, if you were in a successful field, like a lawyer or medicine or something like that, this idea of what these successful fields are. And I think what we've seen now, I mean, certainly with social media and certainly with, I mean, chefs are now famous, right? Like, there's idea of, like, and, you know, certain fields, like, it's so funny. But yeah, the idea for success, the metric for success is so broad. You can do whatever you want. So being pigeonholed, if you have a science aptitude, look outside the box, think about it, and get to know as many people as possible. Network. And yeah, never say no to an opportunity, right? You never know where it's going to lead you. And just one little fork in the road can, or on a Harley ride or something like that, can lead you into a completely different career path than what you envisioned for yourself. So, yeah.
Make a capricious decision every once in a while.
Every once in a while. I'm not always that person, but it seemed to have worked out. So I went with it.
So last question for you. What is wine's role in society? What is wine's role in society?
What is wine's role in society? In my local society, it's all encompassing, right? And it is for every emotion, every sort of celebration. It is it's integral. Like I said before, it becomes a part of who you are. And so down to, you know, something that kind of helps you, I don't know, reflect on certain things and be a catalyst for ideas. I think wine is something that's so cultural too, in that it becomes this beverage that, like, you have at the meal, or you have after a hard day, or after a good day, after so many different moments that I don't know. I feel lucky to be able to create something that can be so impactful for so many people, and it's through that expression of, like, this raw material that is what we farm and what we come to know from our land, down to, like, this moment in a bottle that is, for me, I mean, who's in it, can be profound and thoughtful and thought-provoking, and yeah, there's so many elements to wine, and I think it's not, you know, we're in this weird moment again in time where the wine industry is changing because of other beverages or other things that are coming into the market share, so to speak, and White Claw being one of them. And I don't, not that I don't occasionally like a good White Claw, full disclosure, but I don't, for me, it doesn't have the same visceral experience of, like, sitting around and enjoying a phenomenal meal and thinking back. Like, you don't look back and be like, oh, that White Claw in 2019 was incredible. It was, you know, that wine that we had for that dinner, oh my God, that, like, you know, 2000, like, so-and-so or whatever, that Bordeaux, that Burgundy, and it really informs a sense of time and that storytelling. And I think that's what is so compelling about wine, because it lends itself to an experience in a moment. And that's what draws people back to it who are in it, right? Like, we're in it. So, and people who are collectors, or people who just like to drink wine. often, like I said, you're going back to an old friend or thinking about a moment, and a lot of times it's like, oh, we had that great dinner, and it's this wine that I remember the most, or you have your unicorn wines that you remember. And you don't find that with necessarily, at least I don't, like with like a sparkling water or a beer or something like that. It's been super specific to wine. And I think that is what keeps us going. That's what keeps me going.
All the questions that I have for you today. Is there anything I didn't ask that I should have asked?
I don't think so.
That we didn't cover? We should have
I feel
covered?
like we're comprehensive.
Okay. Excellent. Well, that was a pretty great way to end it then. That's a fantastic answer. So thank you so much
My
for your
pleasure.
time, for your stories, for sharing your perspective with us, and we will let you off the hook.
Oh, good.